Welcome to The Blue Dot, Northern Kentucky's premier political podcast, brought to you by the Kenton County Democratic Executive Committee. Welcome to The Blue Dot podcast, where we elevate the voices of leaders in our community. And we're so very lucky and excited that we have a ton of patriots stepping up to run for office all across the state, and we're here to give them a platform.
That's right, Natalie. The road to 2026 starts now, and people are fired up, to say the least. For today's candidate interview, we welcome Joel Willet, who is running for the open Senate seat now occupied by Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, Joel grew up in Valley Station, just southwest of Louisville. He's a veteran, former intelligence officer, and a business leader who understands the challenges facing working families. But that's just a fraction of his story. Luckily, we have him here today with us to tell us more. Joel, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you both for having me. This is great.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Hey, for listeners who may not know you yet, can you share a bit more about your background and what inspired you to run for the Senate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if anybody misses anything, I would just tell them to go to joelforkentucky.com. You can see the story there and a little bit more about my campaign. But I'm Joel Willet. I'm running for the U.S. Senate seat here in Kentucky that Mitch McConnell has occupied since I was 5 months old. I was born in June of 1984, and I believe Mitch McConnell was elected that November. So 42 years is long enough to be a senator, as Mitch has realized. I grew up in Louisville. My dad was an iron worker. He was a Golden Gloves boxer. My mom worked in hospitals taking care of people, but as I've been telling people on the trail, we had some Kentucky struggles. My parents struggled to make ends meet. Lights didn't always come on when I got home from school. Both my parents struggled with opioid addiction from a fairly early point in my life. I would eventually lose my father to a fentanyl overdose in 2019. Every bit of that could have happened to me. But I was one of the lucky ones because of the institutions of this country. I had incredible grandparents on both sides of my family. I had a church family, but I also had public education. I also had our military, and I also had our civil service. I joined the Army National Guard when I was 17. It was a couple months after 9/11. I went to the University of Louisville and the University of Kentucky, and then that ended up launching a career after I got out of the Army in national security. I spent a year with the FBI working on various counterterrorism issues, and then spent 5 years in the CIA in the Directorate of Operations, serving the country, both domestically here in the States and also overseas in the Balkans and Baltics, Southeast Asia, and Western Europe. My last year in government, I went to the White House Situation Room, where I provided intelligence and crisis support to President Obama and Vice President Biden on a host of issues, from the efforts to reach a nuclear deal with Iran to Russia's initial annexation of Crimea when they invaded there originally, and wrapped up my time in government in 2015 and went to the private sector, in part to help take care of my family, who had continued to struggle over all those years. And I've started running businesses that have put hundreds of people to work every day. I've been the president or CEO of businesses that employed anywhere from 200 to 350 people. So I say all that to say, I understand how our government works at the highest levels. I've worked on our critical issues of national security. I understand what it takes to run and grow businesses and how to treat employees well at the same time. But all of this story was truly my American dream, and I got to live it against all the odds. And I am running for the Senate because I believe that the American dream is dead or dying for far too many across the state of Kentucky or across this country. We have wealth continuing to accumulate at the top. We've got basic necessities of life that are completely unaffordable, like healthcare and education. Hard work in this country used to equal a good life. And I think that if people are working full time, they should be able to afford to send their kids to college. They should be able to afford healthcare when they get sick. They should be able to afford to put a roof over their heads. That's the America that I believe in, and that's why I'm running for the Senate, to restore that American dream.
That's absolutely fantastic. You have an incredible background, and thank you for all your service as well. And you spoke a little bit about some of those issues that's driving you. Can you talk about what are maybe 3 real core issues that you want to improve upon, or what's really driving your desire to take the seat on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing, and I'll kind of pull on a thread on something that I just said, is that I believe that hard work should equal a good life. There is no reason in the most prosperous country on earth that it shouldn't. American leadership has created so much prosperity and wealth around the world and around this country, but we are no longer sharing that wealth. We are no longer sharing that prosperity with the middle class, with working class families upon whose backs all of it was built. We have people working 40, 60-hour weeks. They're unable to afford homes. They're unable to afford healthcare. They're unable to afford groceries increasingly, or to send their kids to college or support their kids in their life's journey in whichever way they see fit. That does not, to me, live up to America's promise. One, where, again, hard work should equal a good life, but two, where we, this generation now, leaves the place better than we found it. So we have to tackle the affordability crisis, and we have to tackle wealth inequality in this country, which I see as one of the primary drivers for the instability that's driving us apart from each other, because we have something like 52% of the gains in the economy since 1993 have gone to the top 1%. It is not sustainable. We cannot have a functioning democracy if that level of inequality keeps up. So primarily running to tackle the crisis, help working class families who I think there's an economic war being waged against them every day in this country. Beyond that, we do have a severe problem with our federal government right now in that it is no longer accountable to the people that it represents. We've had a host of rulings from the Supreme Court and actions from Donald Trump that show that he and his party and his enablers in Congress are going to govern this country as if the score was 100-0. It was not. This is an evenly divided country, and we need leaders who recognize that and who can lead with their values, yes, but who also can govern pragmatically and don't pretend like the other 75 or 77 million people who voted for the other side don't exist.
Really quickly, when you were talking about the disparity in our country, I had a conversation with some Republican friends, and they were saying, I just don't understand why there's just disparity, and it just seems so unfair. And I said, well, we as a country allow this to happen. We elected these officials, and we keep, look at who we elected, who's and who this person's serving. And we, the people, have the power to change that. So, and it seems like that's exactly what you're going for there.
Yeah, no, Natalie, it's an excellent point. I mean, we often say as Democrats that representation matters, and we mean a lot of things by that. We mean, your sexual orientation. We mean, your race or your gender. But one thing we frequently don't mean is whether or not you grew up poor or understand what a hard day's work looks like. And I think that we need people on the ballot, and we need people representing Kentuckians in the Senate, in Congress, who actually understand what life is like for working class families in this state and across this country every day. That representation matters a lot. And I think when you have it, this government can get put back to work for people and not against them at every turn.
Kentucky and the United States, I mean, we're facing so many challenges. And if you were elected to the U.S. Senate and began working across the aisle and trying to find common ground with Republicans and maybe more moderate Democrats than yourself, it seems like there's even somewhat of a rift in the Democratic Party between moderates and progressives. How progressive should the party be? And you spoke to some of those issues. What do you think are some of those key issues, concerns, problems, the things you could find that common ground and maybe actually start working towards some bipartisanship?
Yeah, it is very difficult, and I don't want to pretend like any one senator is going to be able to change the flow of the river on this in this country. Right. But I have to believe that there are reasonable Republicans in the Senate who just need to find a way to break from this fascist fever that is infecting everyone, that is coming from the White House. Republicans in Congress are paralyzed right now. Anytime they want to do something reasonable, anytime they want to work across the aisle, they're often, left tap dancing around whatever Donald Trump is going to tweet or say in the middle of the night. We cannot govern by whim. We cannot govern by social media posts and through a president who seems to have lost a step, whose priorities seem to be on enriching himself. Donald Trump's net worth has increased $3 billion since January.
Crazy.
How is your bottom line doing, Kentucky? His is doing pretty good. So you've got a president who increasingly seems focused on enriching himself and building ballrooms while people can't afford groceries. And he went to the Supreme Court to try to deny SNAP benefits to people who need food stamps. I don't think most Republicans, or at least I choose to believe in my heart that most Republicans don't actually want those things, but we now have an unaccountable executive. So I would just work on building relationships and focusing, on the things that, we all want the same things. I'm fond of saying that, and I believe it. People want security for their family. They want their kids to have a better life than they did. And I think if we can just focus on the outcomes that we want, then maybe that will help us find the path to get there.
Yeah, and bringing it kind of back home a little bit, you'd be sitting at the federal level, but how do you plan to keep kind of one foot grounded at home to ensure that the voices of everyday Kentuckians are heard through the process at a federal level?
Yeah. I mean, we see the perils of that in the history of Mitch McConnell, who I believe sold out this state a long time ago, right? Mm-hmm. In his quest to remake the federal judiciary Kentucky became a bit of an afterthought in his pursuit of power. And it is true that, the Senate and Congress sits in Washington, D.C. It does not sit in Frankfurt. It doesn't sit in Louisville. And whoever represents you at the federal level has to spend more than half of their time in D.C. and in that building. And so you're right to point that out, that, you have to take intentional action to keep yourself tied and grounded to your state. I will just say that, my family still lives in Valley Station. I have a sister on Medicaid, a mom on Medicare, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody that are still here. They've kept me grounded and connected over the years as my national service has taken me away from this state. But I want to point to, Andy Beshear as a role model here. This isn't some guy who hides in the governor's mansion. We've had 14 natural disasters declared in this state in recent years, and Andy has shown up. There are 120 counties in this state, and you can't just neglect places that are difficult to get to or hole up in Frankfurt or in Louisville or wherever. So we're running this campaign in 120 counties. I would govern that way as well. You got to show up, you got to listen, and you got to make sure that you understand what the people you represent are going through every day.
And I have to ask you, you talk a lot about the opioid crisis because that's something that affected you dramatically throughout your life. You also have a strong national security background. I'm just curious about your opinion on this whole narco-terrorist approach that Trump is taking by basically killing people in the Caribbean in these boats. And, I can see, okay, yeah, we obviously have a problem. We need to address that. But is this the right way? And it seems like, especially here in Kentucky, there are better ways to go about getting people help who face these problems. I just was curious what your take was on that.
Yeah. Well, first, Trump is lying to literally everyone about the fentanyl crisis and the solution to it. And he is using opioid deaths to justify extrajudicial killings. And he's using opioid deaths to justify his lawlessness. And I can't let him, use a death like my father's or a death like, so many Kentucky families have experienced to justify killing people without trial, without evidence, without any accountability. I believe 80 people have been killed through these bombings of boats in the Caribbean. Since September, he's ordered over 20 strikes. And he's just wrong. He's wrong about most fentanyl enters the United States over land from Mexico. It is not happening on boats that are going from Venezuela to other islands in the Caribbean. It doesn't even make any sense. So he's lying. The Justice Department has started to, we know from a leaked memo this week that they have labeled fentanyl as a chemical weapon. Remember Iraq and all the chemical weapons and the WMDs and all these sorts of things. And now they're going to try to act like a drug is the same thing. And rhetorically, that might make sense. But as it relates to the laws of warfare and military action, it makes no sense whatsoever. So again, what separates the United States from authoritarian regimes or from regimes that are unaccountable? It is the fact that we have rule of law in this country. If there are civilians out there trafficking drugs that are entering the United States or violating U.S. law and we have some type of jurisdiction, then we should arrest those people. We should try those people, convict them when it's appropriate, because that's our process. And I would just implore all Americans to pay attention to what is being done in your name. Pay attention to what Donald Trump is trying to do, using deaths like my father's as justification. It's un-American, it's wrong, and it's got to stop.
Yeah, when you have the rest of the world denouncing your actions and, they're being labeled as war crimes, and yet they continue. And it seems like many Americans are just, I think they're just overwhelmed, or they aren't paying attention. And probably because their, economic struggles, what they need to focus on also enables, Trump and his administration to get away with things like this.
No, I think you're right. This is a perennial problem in Kentucky and Appalachia and other parts of the inner country, is that, we see death and suffer and poverty and struggle in our backyards every day. And it is so hard to look past, your front yard to, a war zone thousands of miles away, or to a boat of what you're being told is full of drug traffickers in the Caribbean. Why would you think those lives matter when it seems like your own lives don't matter? In Appalachia, it is very hard, but part of what we have to do as Democrats is to communicate to people about Kentucky's role in the world, about America's role in the world. A strong United States that leads with its values, provides security for all of us, that prevents problems that we see overseas reaching our shores. We have to engage. A tariff policy is a prime example of this. We have economic prosperity in this country because of strong allies, because we've been sitting in the driver's seat, leading the world, responsible for these trade regimes. And we've experienced, cheaper prices and things like that because of strong trade policy and strong engagement internationally. So I know it's hard for people to see past, the struggles that are in their own backyards and front yards and all around them. But global engagement is important for the United States security and for our continued prosperity.
I did have one other question I wanted to ask you. I had watched a couple of your other interviews, kind of get to know you a little bit better. And I was struck by your business experience, CEO and investor in businesses and employing lots of people. And I found it kind of ironic that Trump claims that he is a consummate business person, and a lot of his base voted for him because he's such a successful businessman, and we need to run the government like a business. And he's turned the government into a for-profit business for sure, profiting himself and his family and his cronies. But there are some business principles and approaches and strategies I think would apply in government. How do you see things that you've done in business that might benefit your role as a senator?
Well, no, and thanks for providing the opportunity to highlight that. I mean, Donald Trump has failed at just about every venture he's
Right.
Undertaken in his life, from steaks to ties to Trump University, which was not permitted
Runs
to
it right
operate
into the
any
ground.
longer.
Everything he touches, he runs it right into the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's doing that with our country at a rapid
Mhm.
pace. But I don't really buy into the premise that the government needs to run like a business. We always talk about it's a capitalist country and it's a democracy. And what all the smart, nerdy people will tell you is what we have here is democratic capitalism. We don't have democratic socialism. We don't have Marxism or social. We have democratic capitalism. And those are two distinct things, and they're both very important. The capitalism side of the equation is what creates the innovation and the competition and drives prices down and helps bring all this stuff together. The democratic part of the equation is what provides accountability, because capitalism has one goal. It's growth, or profitable growth, I should say. And it's always going to do that. And companies are always going to pursue their bottom lines. And that's their, I hate using this phrase, but that's their optimization function. They know what they need to optimize, and that's what they will do. The democratic side of the equation is what provides the accountability. It ensures that the economy is working for everybody, that we don't have resources that are just being polluted or overused by companies, and that we have capitalism in a framework that's aligned with our constitution and with our laws. For my whole life, all I have ever heard about is the dangers of what happens when the government starts controlling the economy, or when the government starts controlling finances, and they want to act like that's communism, or that's Marxism or socialism, or put all those words in a blender and add
Someism.
Right.
some anger to it,
Someism or
and that's
another.
what
Right.
we have, and that's bad. But what we have now is the opposite of that. Right now in the United States, the financial sector has captured the government, and that is what we need to talk about more than anything, because we have, numbers differ. So you might hear me saying this story a little differently depending on how we're defining it, but rough math remains the same. We had one billionaire in this country in 1937. John Rockefeller died. Bill Gates became either the second or 15th billionaire, depending on how you do the math, in 1987. Second or 15th, not that many. Since that time, we have now 750 of those guys, right? This is not an accident. This isn't some fluke of free market capitalism. This is a choice that we made in this country, and where the rich and the powerful continue to buy their politicians, buy their policies, and lobby, and they have a lot more representation than the rest of the population. And I think that that's something we have to be very concerned about and very focused on fixing. So the last thing I'll say here is just about, I have run these businesses. I know what employees go through. I know what business owners go through, how the tax law impacts cash flow and your investment decisions, and who you can hire and how much you can pay. I get all that intimately. I would be a fierce advocate for small businesses and free and fair competition. And I would be a fierce advocate for workers' rights and employees as well, because I've seen it all up close and personal. I certainly understand both sides. And I think it's time that we have politicians who do.
Right. You have such a dynamic background, and I love your perspective on all of these topics. As you've entered this race, you are going to be facing a primary. You have many primary challengers out there.
What are
Can you
we
tell
up to?
me?
Like 27 or something now?
I think maybe we're up to 6 or 7.
Oh, is it just 6? Okay,
Yeah.
it feels like a lot more.
Yeah, I bet it does.
Tell me one thing that you think sets you apart from all of the others.
I'm going to tell you more than one thing, but let me start by saying Democrats in Kentucky have a lot of great choices. We've got patriots, we've got people who served in uniform, we've got people who served in the civil service, and in my case, you get a little bit of all of that. I've worn the uniform, I have served in national security, I've worked at the highest levels of our federal government, which I think is critical. You have to understand how the executive branch government of our government works if you are going to legislate around it at all or provide any accountability for what is being done in your name at all of these federal agencies and by this administration. So it's very important that you understand that intimately. You've been involved in national security decisions. I've worked on that up close and personal. Beyond that, the government is not the whole country. You have an entire private sector. You have an entire economy that I believe is failing far too many working families. And you've got workers and business owners pitted against each other constantly. I've had to navigate those things. I understand what it takes to run and to grow businesses, to do that profitably while taking care of your employees. And then I'll add to that I have lived a Kentucky life with all of its promise and all of its peril. And I know that I can understand and accurately represent the voters that I'm asking send me to the U.S. Senate. So I believe that all of that combined is incredibly important.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. All
And
right.
we also do one more little thing with all of our guests to get to know you a little better. We do a lightning round. If you're up for that, 5 quick questions.
Okay.
Rapid fire. They're pretty benign. It's okay. We're
Sure.
It's early in the morning. We'll be nice.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Okay. When you're not campaigning, would you rather be on the beach or camping in the woods?
Would I rather be on the beach or camping in the woods? And those are the only 2 choices you're giving me, but I'm going to make a hard left, and I'm going to say that I would rather be playing music with my band in a dive bar.
Okay, hang on.
Yeah.
What's the name of your band and what do you play and what's your music genre?
I'm
inserting into the lightning round here now.
Yeah, no, you just. I think you found a couple of music junkies here, so I'm like, ooh, what is this?
Oh, nice. Yeah, well, I would describe it as radio rock. It's not heavy metal.
Oh.
It's not easy listening, but let's say inspired by the Eagles and U2 and Third Eye Blind and a lot of that late 90s stuff. The band that I had played with most recently in Kentucky was called Everything Zen, but as you can imagine, campaigning is not really permitting me to be an active frontman at this time. Right. So yeah, I play guitar, keyboard, sing, write. You can check me out on iTunes and Spotify or Apple Music if you'd like. Wow. If you do look me up there, I just request that you pretend to like it. I think it's a reasonable request.
Okay. Only if you pretend to like our podcast. You can do that.
No, I love your podcast. It's great.
All right, we're good.
I have a set of drums sitting right across from me, so I play the drums poorly. I wish I could play the guitar. I've tried and tried and tried, and I can't. I can't get it down.
Sounds like we've got to get the Blue Dot Band going here. So.
I might be able to hit a tambourine off timing or something, and that's about it. I like to listen and I like to read and learn, but I've never been able to play.
All righty. Well, good. We learned that about you. Okay. Question number 2, and this might be a little controversial. You're from Louisville. Is it pronounced Louisville, Louisville, or Louisville?
Yeah. Well, within the borders of Kentucky, it is pronounced Louisville.
Louisville. Yep.
Right. And if I'm talking to anybody else, it's Louisville.
That sounds good.
Louisville. Right.
If you could create a new state slogan for Kentucky, what would it be?
Well, our current slogan is united we stand, divided we fall. And I think that is a pretty perfect state slogan.
That's
Perhaps
fair.
I would keep the first part, united we stand, and divided we're just going to keep yelling at each other on the internet and getting nothing done. I don't know if that fits on a flag, but it is truly how I feel.
Yeah. It's kind of what we're living right now.
Right. And when you're driving long distances to your campaign events, are you listening to podcasts or playlists?
We're doing all kinds of things. We are listening to podcasts, and the news. You gotta stay current. You never know when I mean, really, in this environment, anything can happen at any time.
Every day.
We're testing nukes one day. We're not testing nukes.
Right.
We're invading. I think he said he was bombing Mexico, Colombia, and Venezuela just this morning. I don't know. It is really difficult to keep up with.
Insane.
What he's not doing is helping working families in Kentucky. I'll tell you that. Every minute you hear him talking about that nonsense is a minute he's not spent looking out for you. And so I'm listening to podcasts. I'm listening to the news. We're listening to a lot of music like previously discussed. And we might be doing some car karaoke sometimes as well.
Great.
Ooh, like that.
All right, last one. Cincinnati chili. Do you love it or hate it?
I'm probably supposed to pander here. I think that's what the political playbook would tell me to do. But I have to ask you a question.
Okay.
What is Cincinnati chili?
Oh, well, that's fair. It's Skyline chili. Okay, see, now that's fair. Skyline chili,
Well-
Gold Star. It is very. We're in northern Kentucky, so maybe that wasn't a fair question. But if you've ever had Skyline or Gold Star chili, it's there's always a big debate about which one's better, and those who don't live in this area absolutely despise it or they love it.
All right. Well, listen. Next time I come to Kenton County, you guys are going to have to make sure that I experience the Cincinnati chili.
That's fair. That's fair.
Need to go to Dixie Chili down there in Newport.
Dixie Chili in Newport. I'm going to do it.
Hey, that's the old school. Like my kids and my neighbors' kids, whenever they come back into town, they head over to Dixie. But it's not Texas chili. I come from Illinois, so when somebody said, "Hey, Cincinnati chili," the first time I had it, I'm like, "This isn't chili," but I love it. But it's a different experience.
Well, as a lifelong Chicago Cubs fan, I typically don't like things that start with Cincinnati at the beginning. but maybe this chili will win me over.
That's fair.
All right. Well, Joe, before we wrap up, where can listeners learn more about your campaign and get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. Go to joelforkentucky.com. That's all spelled out, FOR, and then state of Kentucky spelled out. You can find me on all social media platforms as Joel for Kentucky as well. So if you just remember that, Joel for Kentucky, you can find me just about anywhere. And would love to be able to earn the support of your listeners and Democrats across the state. I know that receiving endless text messages and emails from politicians is super annoying. I'm annoyed with it myself, believe me, but campaigns can't run effectively just on vibes and podcast interviews, right? Whatever you think the most important thing in politics is, as our Congressman Morgan McGarvey is fond of pointing out, it takes money. It takes money to knock doors. It takes money to host events and to advertise and get the message out. I hope the support comes my way, but if it doesn't, please find a candidate that you are passionate about. Invest in those candidates. Invest in our democracy. We've got a 5-alarm fire out there, and it's going to require all of us to get across the finish line here.
Well, after speaking with you, I think Joel for Kentucky is a perfect slogan because you are definitely fighting for Kentucky, and we appreciate your effort and for putting yourself out there. Takes a lot of courage and faith and just, passion for the people and for your Commonwealth. We appreciate that. So thanks for joining us today and sharing your vision for Kentucky.
Yeah. Well, Natalie, Brian, thank you guys so much for doing this and providing candidates the forum to speak to Kentucky voters.
Absolutely.
Right, thank you very much.
All right, that's it for this candidate interview edition. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming podcasts or exclusive material. And don't forget, you can join the conversation at our Facebook and Instagram pages or at blue.podcast.com. And if you like listening to the podcast, please consider donating to help fund it, which you can do by clicking on the donate link at blue.podcast.com. Until next time, stay curious, keep the facts in focus, and never stop fighting for what matters. Peace out, everybody.